Scarlett never expected a simple Sunday morning to unravel her entire sense of peace. At 28, she had worked hard to build a modest but meaningful life with her husband David. They had their flaws like any couple, but she believed they shared something real until her phone buzzed and everything changed. The name Margaret flashed across the screen, and Scarlett hesitated before answering. Her mother-in-law had always been cold, manipulative, in subtle ways, but this time her voice was sharp, commanding, and unapologetic. Tomorrow, 10 euros or AM at the Notary. I'm selling your cottage. I already took an advance from the buyers. You just need to show up and sign. Scarlett stood frozen in her kitchen, gripping the phone as Margaret hung up without waiting for a response. Her grandmother's Dacha, a rustic countryside cottage, passed down to her after years of love, and memories was being sold behind her back. The betrayal hit hard. That cottage had been her sanctuary, growing up filled with summers spent chasing fireflies, baking bread with her grandmother, and curling up by the fireplace with books. It was not just a property, it was sacred. Tears welled in Scarlett's eyes as she stormed into the bedroom and woke David. "Your mother is trying to sell my Dacha. She already took money from some buyers," she said, trembling with disbelief. David rubbed his eyes, confusion turning to fury. "She can't do that. It's in your name, Scarlett. That's illegal." Scarlett paced the room, the shock wearing off, and turning into righteous anger. What if she forged something? What if we're already too late? They packed their bags without another word. The drive to the countryside was tense, the air thick with dread. As the familiar trees blurred past them, Scarlett clenched her fists. Margaret had gone too far this time. And one thing was certain, Scarlett would not go down without a fight. The road to the countryside had never felt this long, nor had the air inside the car ever been so silent. Scarlett's fingers dug into her seatbelt, her mind cycling through every word Margaret had said. The Dacha was more than a weekend retreat. It was her grandmother's legacy, her own piece of peace in a chaotic world. As they pulled up the gravel path, the familiar creak of the gate welcomed them like an old friend. The wildflowers still swayed in the wind, the old oak tree still stood strong, and for a moment Scarlett's chest ached with longing for the time before betrayal turned home into battlefield. Inside the house was still, almost too still. Every corner felt like it had been watched. As Scarlett opened the kitchen drawer, looking for the spare matches, her fingers brushed against something thick. She pulled out a stack of real estate documents, high-resolution images of the Dacha, a listing sheet, a price tag she had never agreed to. Her heart sank. "David, come look at this," she whispered. When he stepped in and took the papers from her trembling hands, his face turned from concern to outright rage. "She's been planning this for months," he said, voice low. This wasn't some emotional impulse. This was a calculated move. Scarlett sank into the kitchen chair, betrayal curling in her stomach like poison. Margaret had not just crossed a line, she had built a whole new world on the other side of it. This wasn't just about the Dacha. It was about power, about deception, and Scarlett had unknowingly been a pawn in a game she never agreed to play. She looked out the window, her eyes locked on the driveway, as if expecting Margaret to appear at any moment. "We are not signing anything tomorrow," she said, the steel in her voice surprising even herself. "If you were in Scarlett's shoes, would you sign away your grandmother's legacy? Let us know in the comments by typing yes if you'd fight back too, and don't forget to subscribe to follow the rest of this jaw-dropping story." The sun began to dip behind the hills, bathing the Dacha in a golden hue. Scarlett and David sat on the porch in silence, the papers between them. They were not just fighting for a house. They were fighting for the truth. The morning of the notary appointment arrived cloaked in a tension so thick, Scarlett could barely breathe. Dressed in calm neutrals to mask the storm inside her, she walked beside David through the glass doors of Miller and Sons Notary Services. The receptionist's polite smile felt painfully out of place as she directed them to a small conference room. Inside, Margaret was already seated, her posture impeccable, a neat stack of documents laid out before her like trophies. Across from her sat the buyers, a polished couple with impatient eyes and practiced smiles, the kind of people used to getting what they want. But not today, Scarlett thought. Not with my Dacha. When Margaret saw them enter, her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. She did not offer a greeting. David broke the silence first. You know this sale is illegal, right? He said calmly. Scarlett owns the Dacha. You have no right to sell it. Margaret lifted her chin, her voice clipped. I've already explained myself. All that's left is for her to sign. Scarlett stepped forward, eyes blazing. I'm not signing a damn thing, she said, her voice firm but shaking. And I want to know what is really going on. Why are you so desperate? For the first time, Margaret's polished mask cracked. A flicker of panic passed through her eyes before she turned to the buyers. Please excuse us, she said stiffly, grabbing her purse. But as she stood, the notary walked in. If there's a dispute about ownership, he announced this meeting is postponed until it's resolved. Margaret's face paled. Her fingers clenched the folder in front of her like a lifeline. Scarlett stepped closer. Why are you doing this? What are you hiding? Before Margaret could answer. The female buyer interjected. If this is a legal mess, we want no part in it. The couple stood and walked out, leaving Margaret frozen. The deal had just collapsed in real time. Margaret's composure crumbled, and without a word, she turned and rushed out of the office. Scarlett and David exchanged a glance, anger, confusion, and something else pulsing between them, purpose. They had come expecting confrontation, but now they were chasing a mystery. Scarlett gripped David's hand. We're not done. We need to find out what she's running from. Let me know when you're ready for Outline 4. The moment Margaret disappeared from the notary office, Scarlett and David sprang into action. They barely had time to process what had just happened, the sale collapsing, the buyers walking away in frustration, and Margaret fleeing like a woman with something to hide. Fueled by adrenaline and questions that burned hotter than their rage, they jumped into their car, trailing Margaret's silver sedan through the city's tangled morning traffic. She's heading toward the industrial district, David muttered, eyes fixed on her bumper. Scarlett's stomach tightened. The district was no place for someone like Margaret, pristine, polished, meticulous to a fault. But as they drove deeper into the maze of warehouses and graffiti-tagged alleyways, the stakes only grew heavier. Margaret's car finally rolled into a cracked parking lot in front of a rundown warehouse with a rusted sign that read Storage Solutions. From their vantage point, behind a stack of pallets, Scarlett and David watched as Margaret stepped out, glanced over her shoulder like a fugitive, and disappeared inside. They waited a moment, then followed, slipping through a side door left ajar. The air inside was thick with dust and secrets. Fluorescent lights flickered above rows of dented storage units. Scarlett could hear muffled voices from the back, Margaret's unmistakable tone, clipped and urgent, and another deeper voice laced with menace. I told you I'm handling it, Margaret snapped. The sale was supposed to go through today, but my daughter-in-law refused. I just need a little more time. You've had enough time, the man growled. I want my money, Margaret. You know what happens if I don't get it. His voice was low, threatening, final. Scarlett and David crouched behind a storage crate, peeking through a sliver in the wall. The man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a jagged scar across his cheek, stepped toward Margaret, and for the first time, Scarlett saw her mother-in-law cower. The powerful, overbearing woman was now trembling in front of a man who looked like he had done far worse than extortion. I just need to convince her, Margaret said, almost pleading. The Dacha's worth enough. But Scarlett had heard enough. Her sanctuary was a pawn in something dangerous. David looked at her, his eyes mirroring her shock. We need answers, she whispered. And we need them now. Scarlett's mind reeled as she and David slipped silently out of the warehouse. The image of Margaret, once proud now broken, haunted her. She had watched her mother-in-law beg a dangerous man for mercy, bargaining away the Dacha, like it was nothing more than a check to be cashed. But now Scarlett understood this was not about greed or spite. It was about fear. Margaret was drowning in debt and desperation, and she had nearly destroyed Scarlett's legacy to stay afloat. The drive home was somber, the silence between Scarlett and David heavy with unspoken thoughts. Even now, Scarlett struggled to shake the fury inside her. How could Margaret keep this a secret? How dare she gamble with their safety? And yet she had done it to protect David. That was the sharpest cut of all. Back at their apartment, the air felt different. Thicker. Heavier. Margaret sat on the couch, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes refusing to meet Scarlett's. David broke the silence first. "Mom! Who is he? What does he want?" Margaret took a long breath, and the dam finally broke. "His name is Victor. I borrowed from him when I got caught in an investment scam. I thought I could make things better, maybe even leave something for you both, but I lost everything. When I could not repay him, he started making threats." Scarlett's anger began to shift, not into forgiveness, but understanding. "And so you tried to sell the Dacha behind my back," she said, voice cold. "You should have come to us. You should have trusted us." Margaret looked up, her eyes bloodshot and filled with regret. "I was ashamed. And I was terrified." Scarlett crossed her arms, her mind already spinning. Victor was not going away quietly. The debt had to be settled, and the police were not an option. Not with Margaret's life. And now David's on the line. "We need a plan," she said, glancing between them. "Because if Victor finds out the sale is off, he might come after us all." David nodded solemnly. "Then we stop waiting. We fight back." The past was no longer the only thing worth protecting. Now it was their future. The Dacha, their peace, their lives. And for that, Scarlett would go to war. The next morning, tension lingered in the apartment, like storm clouds refusing to pass. Scarlett paced the kitchen floor, her mind racing for options. Margaret had already sold off most of her valuables, and their own savings were nowhere near enough to cover the $60,000 Victor demanded. Scarlett's gaze landed on David, who sat at the table furrowing his brow, flipping through his contacts. "What about Uncle Henry?" he finally asked. Scarlett paused. They hadn't spoken to Henry in years, not since a bitter argument over inheritance. But he had the means, and more importantly, he cared about David. Margaret's face flushed. "Henry and I, things ended badly, but he always loved you. Maybe if we talked to him." It was a fragile hope, the only one in the world. David heard the pause back again. His voice trembled at first, but to their surprise, Henry didn't hang up. He listened, and after a long pause, he sighed. "Your mother's pride always got you into trouble. I'll help on one condition. You let me handle the rest. No Margaret, no drama." Scarlett agreed instantly. Bride could wait. Their lives would not. While David arranged the money for Henry, Scarlett contacted a private investigator named Ron out the street and repeated the results. When she explained the situation, he did not flinch. "Victor's got a record. If you can bait him into a public place, I'll make sure the police are waiting." The plan was set in motion. Margaret would lure Victor into a trap under the guise of handing over the money. Scarlett coached her through the call, standing nearby, with her arms crossed, as Margaret's voice wavered. "I have the money. Meet me at Rose Park tomorrow, 3 o'clock. A pause. Then Victor's voice crackled through the speaker, low and menacing. "If this is a trick, Margaret, I swear," she ended the call before he could finish. That night, none of them slept. Scarlett lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her pulse echoing like war drums. The Dacha was still hers for now, but it was no longer just about property. Victor had made it personal. Tomorrow, she was not just showing up to save a home. She was showing up to end the fear. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over Rose Park as Scarlett, David, and Margaret stood silently beneath the old oak tree, the same one where Scarlett and David had once shared their first kiss. This time there was no romance in the air, only tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Victor arrived on time, his leather jacket flaring behind him, like a villain in a bad movie. He sneered, eyeing the envelope in Margaret's trembling hands. "You better pray this is enough," he growled. But just as his fingers touched the envelope, sirens wailed. Scarlett stepped forward, her voice steady. "Game's over, Victor." In a blur, officers surrounded him. Victor resisted. Of course he did, but it was no use. He was handcuffed and hauled off, shouting threats that now sounded hollow. As the silence returned to the park, Margaret collapsed onto the bench, tears streaming down her face, not just from fear, but from months of holding in guilt, shame, and desperation. Scarlett sat beside her, not ready to forgive. but finally ready to understand. The cottage, their sanctuary, was safe, but more importantly, so were they. Yet Scarlett knew deep down this wasn't the end, it was merely the beginning of a new chapter where secrets could no longer survive in shadows. The buyers were refunded, the notary signed off to cancel the sale, and Tom, the investigator, handed over Victor's file to police. But as Scarlett walked once again through the wildflower field behind the Dacha, wind catching her hair like a whisper of fate, a thought lingered. What if there were more Victors out there, more secrets yet to surface? If you felt every twist in Scarlett's journey, comment yes. Below hit like, and don't forget to subscribe, because this story might not be over.